Hello and welcome to today's edition of the J&B F1 podcast. It's Wednesday, the 24th of June 2015, the week after the Austrian Grand Prix. We've got plenty to discuss today, not least the proceedings on the weekend, as well as thoughts whether this race was boring, as has been the consensus for many of the races throughout this season. We also look at the link between Red Bull and a potential switch to Ferrari power, whilst we also look into a blast from the past in the 2012 European Grand Prix, the last event held at the venue. I'm Baden Westerweller, and I'm joined today by Jawad Yaqub once again. How are you, Jawad?
I'm very well, thank you, Baden. It's good to be here and good to look at what happened over the weekend.
Well, let's get stuck into it without further ado. Nico Rosberg won on Sunday. It was his third win from the past four events. He took advantage of a poor start from Lewis Hamilton, not for the first time this season, and he really controlled proceedings from this point. What would you say, Jawad? Is it a sign of Nico possibly coming into the ascendancy, or is it just a little blip for Lewis?
Well, I think Nico's been pretty good over the past few races. Obviously, Monaco, a lot of people discount that because it was Hamilton's race to win, but ultimately the team cost him that win there. But yeah, he has been Mr. Consistent so far this season, and a lot of the criticism we had for him going back to the first flyaway races was the fact that he had come away from those four races without a race win, but he's slowly starting to accumulate now, and he's within 10 points of Hamilton going into the British Grand Prix in a fortnight's time. So still plenty of races ahead to look forward to in terms of the championship. A lot of people were discounting Rosberg, judging from Hamilton's form, but Hamilton, he really didn't have the form all weekend, you have to say. He was struggling in practice, and then obviously qualifying, Rosberg would have been on pole position in hindsight if he hadn't locked up going into turn 8 on the final flying lap, and in the end Hamilton was faster by 2/10. But yeah, as you said, he made the mistake on the start, Hamilton, and allowed Rosberg to pretty much capitalize from there.
Yeah, well, Hamilton, he really did make quite a few blunders throughout that race as it was. He ended up having an additional 5 seconds added to his time after he crossed that white line exiting the pits, cost him 5 seconds, but ultimately it would have been academic because Rosberg was just constantly too fast, and as it was, he just led him home quite comfortably. And probably the first time this season where it just looked like Hamilton couldn't come close to Nico, whether it's the track design just suits the German or whether Lewis just had simply an off weekend, who knows. But the point is, it's now 10 points, really, from where we were after those flyaways, as you say. Things have really tightened up, and now we head to Silverstone in a fortnight, and Hamilton really is the one who needs to reassert himself, because early on it was pretty much assumed that he was going to be the one to beat, but hats off to Nico. He's really turned it around the last 3 or 4 events.
But the biggest challenge now for Nico is he goes to Silverstone, which is Hamilton's home Grand Prix, of course, and there'll be a lot of support, I'm sure, for the number 44 driver. And even last year we saw Hamilton had the problem in qualifying, but he was able to come back in the race, and Nico obviously had that retirement during the race. So a lot of support for Hamilton in Silverstone, so I'm sure that we'll be looking forward to see what happens there. But going on also in the race, we had the first lap incident involving Kimi Räikkönen and Fernando Alonso. Alonso, the innocent victim in that one. Kimi exiting turn 2, lighten up the rear and losing control pretty much. And yeah, that collected Alonso. It was a pretty horrific crash, but it was good to see the both drivers walking away uninjured.
Absolutely. It was good to see that Fernando had a bit of caution and care there for his ex-teammate, even though he's obviously parted Ferrari in acrimonious circumstances. But it was a close call for the Finn there. Really, the car did come close to mounting the cockpit and collecting his head. We've seen that also with Alonso at Belgium a couple of years back. So it's a good that nothing more sinister took place. But the point from this is Kimi has come in for a lot more criticism as a result on the back of Canada, where he had his spin. There's now a lot of pressure mounting regarding this will he or won't he debate being renewed by Ferrari into next season.
And I think we learnt as well over the weekend that it's the decision on Kimi's future will not only be in the hands of Ferrari's team principal Maurizio Arrivabene, it will be also decided by the president of Ferrari himself, Sergio Marchionne. So I'm sure they're going to sit down soon and have a discussion. But there was some word coming into the race that Kimi, someone had presented Kimi with a deal that if he were to stay with the team, that he would have to get a pay cut. But he dismissed those rumours. They were coming out of Italy, of course, and he dismissed those immediately, slamming them as being bull, beep, beep, beep. So, yeah, we'll see in the coming races how Kimi goes. But it is disappointing that these are the circumstances at the moment. Speaking of both Raikkonen and Alonso, it was a poor weekend, essentially for both the drivers. So Kimi Raikkonen out in Q1, Fernando Alonso having more problems with the Honda engine. He and his teammate Jenson Button took 25-place grid penalties. I mean, we discussed this in our pre-race cast, and, the 25-place penalties, how ridiculous is that? And it's not going to get Honda anywhere and McLaren anywhere having to take penalties. It doesn't seem like they're making strides with that. So
it's becoming commonplace these days to see the side of both cars pulled off the side within the opening laps, and nothing's really changing to date. Obviously, it was compounded by this fanciful 25 position penalty, which really, in hindsight, can't be achieved in any way with the grid only being 20 cars. But it's really comical to McLaren. You couldn't help but see when Button was having a bit of a laugh about it. Like, what's he going to do? He's just in such a position that's all he can really do.
He might as well be starting from Silverstone rather than taking 25 place penalties. But yeah, I mean, obviously there's a test going on at the moment at the Red Bull Ring, 2 days of testing. So I'll put the link in the description if you can follow Peak F1, a page that I operate that delivers results and summaries and whatnot. And I'll be able to put those results from that test up there, and you can see how everyone's going. But from what I hear, it was wet overnight at the Red Bull Ring, and a lot of drivers got in a bit of wet running. So it'll be interesting to see that. But going on with the race, of course, there was plenty of good battles throughout the race, even though at the front it was pretty stagnant with Rosberg and Hamilton. We saw some pretty good battles between the likes of Massa and Vettel. Massa eventually finishing third because of a pit stop drama that Vettel had.
Well, again, we've seen there, obviously, Ferrari, that's twice in 2 weekends that they've squandered that third podium position for a pretty comical error, just a few seconds lost from Kimi's spin at the hairpin at Montreal, and then a dodgy pit stop for Sebastian's cost him a podium. It's, I don't know, only small points. Obviously, Ferrari's not really going to be in the hunt for the title this season, but it must be frustrating to them when they're clearly that second-best team and they're just not capitalising.
Yeah, and as you said, 2 weekends in a row they've conceded podiums to Williams in there. And looking at the points as well, Williams are now within, with the points that they accumulated in Austria, they're within 63 points of Ferrari now. So going back to the start of the season where Ferrari was on the podium every single race, now 2 back-to-back podiums for Williams. Obviously, the non-finishing of Raikkonen as well has brought Williams back in touch. So good to see for that team. And there was a lot of criticism about Williams at the start of the season that, the expectation after their results last year was that they would be getting podiums again. But one thing that people failed to see was the fact that Williams, within the first 5 races, had more points than they did in the first 5 races last season. So considering the budget differences as well between Williams and Ferrari obviously has that bigger budget, and they can continuously upgrade their car, and obviously they've made such big strides since 2014, whereas Williams, probably not as much, but still, they're starting to get there now. We can see obviously with the 2 podiums between Massa and Bottas in the last 2 races.
Oh, absolutely. It's a natural evolution. It's clearly clouded by Ferrari's resurgence in the middle of all that, but they've clearly made these steps forward. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been there to pounce on the errors by Maranello, and well done to them. Who knows whether they could replicate the effort on home soil at Silverstone in a couple of weeks' time.
Indeed, we'll look forward to that. But also, as we were saying, the good battles throughout the race. We had Massa Vettel towards the end of the race. It was really close, wasn't it? Having to avoid all those back markers. And I think Massa said on the podium as well that it was all to do with experience, the experience he has, and they had a good laugh about it with Gerhard Berger on the podium, so that was great. But also Valtteri Bottas and Nico Hulkenberg as well, very close between those two. Same with Pastor Maldonado, Max Verstappen. We saw Maldonado having a moment.
Oh yeah, he nearly didn't make it there again. That would have been comical to see him get so close to the line. It's happened a few times where he's been on course for a solid result and he's binned it for whatever reason in the dying stages. But he did manage to catch that tank slapper, and Max was also a bit unawares as a result of that. He ran wide, and that's what cost him that opportunity for 7th position ultimately.
Yeah, and that's pretty good. And you got to say for Maldonado, who's had a torrid start to the season, getting points now finally is it's what he needs, really.
Yeah, justify those bolivars that keep coming through the door.
Exactly.
Maybe get another season now.
But yes, certainly that. And also we saw on social media after the race, Roman Grosjean was praising the battle he had with Felipe Nasr as well. Grosjean unfortunately retired with some kind of gearbox issue, but there was a moment where he was pretty close with Felipe Nasr racing wheel to wheel. And I think that was really good to see. You know, a lot of people have, as we'll discuss later, have criticised, you know, the racing this year that we're not seeing. It's very boring and whatnot, but in Austria we really did see a lot of close wheel-to-wheel racing, albeit it wasn't for the lead, it was for, you know, other positions, but it's racing nonetheless.
Well, on that note, it was good to see a rookie in the sense of Nasr, not that he's exactly a 17-year-old in the mould of Max Verstappen, but he's clearly got the credentials there, and it is interesting, he's been linked in the past 24 hours to a potential move to Williams, where he did spend a season as a reserve driver. That is in line with this debate about Valtteri Bottas possibly moving on to Ferrari. But as it was this weekend, he certainly showed he's got the skills there to progress throughout his career. Yeah,
and it was unfortunate, really, that they missed out on points. But then again, the points were capped off by Daniel Ricciardo for Red Bull being their home event. And I guess even though 1 point doesn't really cry much for the Red Bull outfit, who are used to so much success, you know, it was a pretty stellar drive that Ricciardo put in, obviously starting off on the soft tyres and then running till about lap 50. And then, in the end, rounding up Nasser and almost catching Perez for 9th. So...
Oh, it's good reward. Clearly, Dan's been a frustrated individual in previous weeks. Who wouldn't be after the base that he laid for himself at the conclusion of last season? But clearly Red Bull are going through a real trough at the moment, and all the signs do part to do show that there will be a parting of ways between Renault and Red Bull. Whether this comes to fruition sooner than later, who knows?
Indeed, and this season will be indeed character building for Ricciardo. We've seen him as being a really really cheerful person and very easygoing. But as you said, the frustrations that he's had over the past few weekends, obviously with the Renault side of things and whatnot, it'll be really character building to see how he moves forward. But as you mentioned there before, Red Bull and Renault potentially parting ways. But a bit of news we learnt over the weekend is Red Bull and Ferrari, could they perhaps get back together?
No, they did it for one season in 2006 prior to the Renault partnership forming. It was a lot to do with Adrian Newey. He didn't like the dimensions of that Ferrari at the time, and hence they moved on, had their successful tenure from 2010 to 2013. But 1.5 years, it seems like an awful long time ago as it stands. And yeah, they're looking like moving on now. Renault doesn't know what they're going to do in the future. So regardless of that, Red Bull considering their options, but a lot has been made of this link to Ferrari. It wouldn't be the privileged status earned as a Renault Works team. That'd be a mere customer, and they'd really be on the back foot if they want to have any hope of wins, let alone podiums in that case.
Yeah, indeed. The point you make there about being a customer, I think that's probably the most important point to look at. The fact that, at the moment Red Bull and Renault have a works relationship, and the benefit of having a works relationship is you don't really have to pay for the engine. So a point that Christian Horner made over the weekend when he was asked about this, he said, that's very nice that Ferrari have made an offer. I'm sure they'll give us one an engine for free. And the point he makes there is, Red Bull at the moment don't really pay for their engines with Renault because it's a works relationship they have there. Becoming a customer to Ferrari means they'll have to purchase engines, and engines at the moment, the power units are quite expensive. A lot of the smaller teams struggle to, pay off for the engine as well as development. So even though Red Bull have quite a bit of money, would they really want that dynamic to pay for an engine but then not get the results they want?
Well, this is where that entire dynamic of the wanted return back to the V8 era comes into the equation. It's much cheaper on these other teams. Red Bull aren't exactly a minnow independent. They've got billions coming in from Mr. Natashits, but who knows in the future whether they won't want to stick around if they're going to be a customer. They want to be in it to win, such as their energy drink selling motif.
Exactly. And I'll put a link in the description, and we'll put a link in the description as well, an article that I've written that would have got published today, I'm pretty sure, regarding the Red Bull and Ferrari link and why, that dynamic won't work, because, there won't be really a reciprocal relationship there. It'll all be one-sided. Ferrari will have complete control over the engine. So as far as Red Bull go into changing the engine, they really can't. And Ron Dennis as well has made a point. Yes, Honda are, the relationship with Honda isn't really working out at the moment in terms of performance, but he makes a fair point that in this current era of manufacturer-dominated Formula One, having being the works team for a manufacturer is the only thing that's going to win you championships. Being a customer, sure, you might win some races, but it's not going to make you a championship contender.
Well, that's the trade-off, really. We've seen with Williams, obviously, they've made leaps and strides with the Mercedes tie-up, but they're obviously not going to be in a position to contend for those world championships until they strike a works deal of their own, perhaps in coming seasons. And it is interesting on this Renault-Ferrari note. There was some conjecture that this could have been a ploy by Sergio Marchionne to perhaps throw off the Volkswagen group, just get them a little bit envious about the whole possibility, whether it was to make sure that Renault have no chance of advancing this option, which has been pushed quite vigorously, it must be said, in recent weeks and months by Marco.
Oh, yeah, but you got to say the whole Volkswagen Audi group thing has gone a little quiet in the past few weeks. So, again, they've resisted coming into Formula One for so long now. Yes, it would be a good opportunity for them, but, they've got to assess their options, really, considering the difficulty that Honda's had coming into the sport, with the limited testing and whatnot, and limited development that they have on the engines. Would it really be appealing for a new manufacturer to come in?
Oh, it's a cautionary tale, that's for sure. The Honda relationship. Obviously, they're only 8 races into what would be planned to be another long-term partnership, but they certainly aren't stupid for considering very closely whether it's worth all of this time and effort to see and endure what McLaren have been today.
Yeah, indeed. So, but it'll be interesting to see how the Red Bull thing pans out. Obviously, for pretty much the entire season, they have been moaning a little bit about trying to push Renault into, publicly criticising Renault.
Well, we saw after the first race, so scathing, then it died off. But since Monaco, Canada, it's really come back with a vengeance.
Yeah, ever since they started copying the penalties, but definitely something that needs to be looked at. I'm sure there have been calls over the past few days after the Austrian Grand Prix that perhaps not Ferrari essentially, but Renault and Honda should be allowed to catch up to Mercedes and Ferrari. They give them a bit more testing time and whatnot to allow them to get their power units up to scratch. And obviously that's going to cause a lot of conjecture. But what do you think? Do you think they should be allowed to catch up within the current season, or wait like Ferrari and do it,
Oh, it's a timeless debate. We saw where Ferrari were 12 months ago. They were nowhere. They were copying everything. There was just the usual uproar from the Italian locals. But look where they're at now. They're often on the podium fighting for race victories on any given weekend. Obviously, they've got to wait their turn. Mercedes put in years of development. They sacrificed pretty much, I don't know, since they came back in 2010, they were struggling for a good 3 or 4 seasons, and look at the foundations that's led to. They're just you haven't really seen any kind of unparalleled domination quite like it. Even the Red Bull days, they weren't this far out ahead of the field.
Yeah, this sort of, the Mercedes domination at the moment sort of harks back to, the early McLaren Honda days, 88, 89, obviously 88, that dominant season they had where they won all but one race. And obviously even, some of the Schumacher era at Ferrari too.
I don't even think Ferrari were quite this dominant in those times. There was always someone who was mixing it up with them. Just Mercedes, from the lights out, they're just on another field. It's really like you get all this debate, all this criticism, but they've pulled off the hard yards. Years and years of development's gone into it, and they should enjoy it. Obviously, it gets to a point, maybe if in 3 or 4 seasons it's still going along as it is now, you'd perhaps wonder maybe it's time to give them a bit of a hand behind the back to just bring them into line with the rest of the field.
Or just change the regulations again, as they always do when a team reaches the peak. But that's just the cyclical nature of Formula One. So perhaps in 2-3 seasons' time, as you say, we might have another team on top.
Yeah,
and Mercedes might be, further back. The way what happened to Red Bull. Red Bull dominated 2010 to 2013, but then as soon as we went into the hybrid turbo era, they've just gone completely.
Yeah, well, who knows? Honda for 2017, if this is when the new regs come in, perhaps they'll just throw the kitchen sink into this and they'll come out on top after a couple of seasons of wanting fortunes.
Yeah, exactly. It's not as easy as it once was before. It's a lot more stringent in terms of regulations and whatnot, what you can and what you can't do. And probably one of the things they have to look at, although, yes, this is a measure introduced for cost control, is the whole 4 power units thing, especially with the teams who are struggling.
Well, that ties in, I think, as well to the whole V8 debate that keeps getting brought up. The want to return to that and just a lot more on the reliability side. They were built like a brick, essentially, those, compared to these essential hybrid power units that are built, which is still open very much to a lot of gremlins setting in.
Yeah, like a lot of electrical problems, obviously, with them. But would we really want to go back, considering the steps forward made from an engineering point of view? The hybrid engines are fascinating with the energy recovery systems and whatnot, but would the engineers want to go back?
I think naturally you can understand where Adrian Newey's coming from when he says he doesn't feel like it's pure racing anymore, but it's cutting edge, this technology. It's clearly got the place for the future. Just because it's not yielding the desirable results which everyone demands doesn't mean that they should just say, all right, that's it, forget about it. That was a huge amount of capital that was thrown in to get this new formula, new era underway for 2014.
And what would that say about the sport also going backwards?
Yeah, you're not going to really trust something that decides after essentially 5 seconds, 5 minutes, oh, well, let's go back to how it was. And now what you'd say in F1 terms, a year is a decade. You'd be going back to the dark ages, in a sense, going back 3 or 4 seasons.
Exactly. And but we'll see how this all pans out, I'm sure, over the coming weeks and coming months. There'll be some more things to learn from that. But anyway, time to move on. One of the big questions coming out of this weekend was the race boring?
That's been one that we've been perhaps posed with after most Grand Prix, if not all of them this season. It's come up again, despite the fact that it wasn't Lewis Hamilton out there streaking them from the first lap. It's good we've got we've got a head-to-head battle looming again this season, perhaps even more so than we had last year.
Potentially, yes, but considering all the good battles we saw throughout the race, wheel to wheel, and obviously Massa and Vettel fighting over the last place on the podium, was what we saw on track really as boring as people say it was on social media after the race?
Oh, most circumstances, when they cut to another shot, there would be some kind of wheel-to-wheel combat going on, whether it was, as we said earlier, Verstappen and Maldonado, Massa and Vettel, or Nasser and Ricciardo fighting over that last position in the points. It doesn't have to be at the front where it's happening for it to be a dull race. If it's happening further back, it's great. It doesn't matter if fighting 1st, 8th, 11th. They're all up for something. Pride's at stake. Clearly, it means a lot to them.
Yeah, racing is racing, and it's interesting. There's there has been quite a few races this season that I'll admit were not the most exciting. They were quite processional. Canada is one that comes to mind. But in terms of, wheel-to-wheel racing, all-round racing, Austria was, Austria gets a little tick from me. Wasn't the best Grand Prix, of course,
no,
but still gets a tick. And
it's just something we're going to have to deal with, I think, most weekends as it is. No one's ever going to be completely satisfied until we have maybe a 10-car pile-up as we did in '98 at Belgium, and chaos reigns and we suddenly get the back markers up the front. No one can ever be that appeased. So it's just a reality, I guess, of the advent of social media. It's opened up a lot of this avenue for criticism, which obviously wasn't a possibility in years gone by. But now, drop of a hat, you're just seeing all the real, I guess you could call them campaigners, coming out of the woodwork at every given opportunity.
Exactly. And talking about some good races with a lot of action, June 24, wind the clock back 3 years, the European Grand Prix, the last European Grand Prix in Valencia, obviously before they lost out.
Yeah, what a way for them to depart that circuit on. They said the first 3 or 4 seasons they ran there that it was 2011 speaks for itself, really. I'd have to say that's the
a complete walkover.
I don't believe there was a single retirement that year, and I genuinely rate it as the most dull race I've ever viewed in my 17 years of watching F1. But 2012, for them to sign off on that note, fond memories to this day of what transpired that afternoon.
Would you say the 2011 race was more boring than what we're seeing at the moment, or?
Oh, absolutely. Anything would take the interest levels over that one. That was really stuff that you would, if there was one race you wouldn't want to see, go back. That's the one.
That's the one. But yeah, by the time we got to 2012, Valencia had the reputation of being a boring race, and then once we saw qualifying, Sebastian Vettel on pole position in his RB8, was it? Yeah, it was the RB8.
Yeah, that'd be the one.
Yeah, in the RB8, and then but at that point in the season we had 7 different winners from the first 7 races, so it was conjecture as to who would win the 8th race of the season. But the way it started seemed pretty normal and everything, until obviously Vettel had his alternator problem.
Q's chucking those gloves with a complete fury into the ground.
Could watch those scenes we've seen those scenes on repeat many times. A lot of emotion coming out of that. And then Fernando Alonso starting 11th, and he ended up in the lead of that race at that point after Vettel's retirement. Grosjean running in 2nd.
Oh, there was some great combat there as well between those two. They were really giving each other the respect, but also pulling off some breathtaking moves, which you don't see every day.
No, not at all. And it was a bit of a shame for Grosjean then to retire from an alternator failure as well. Renault's having reliability issues that year.
Yeah, the Magneti Morelli, I believe, alternator came in for a lot of flack, especially from Dr. Marco around this time, despite the fact that they did go on to win the title.
Yeah, but albeit very closely. It was a closer battle. But so Grosjean had his retirement, which ultimately brought Kimi Räikkönen was already a contender for the podium in his Lotus. That was his first year back in F1 after his first retirement, and then Lewis Hamilton passed to Maldonado. That was the final. That was the final part of the narrative, where 2 laps from the end of the race, Maldonado goes off track, tries to rejoin, and takes Hamilton off in the process. And
never would have guessed that one. Maldonado fighting for a piece of turf. It was always going to end bad.
Exactly. There was no room at all for him to come back, and essentially just ran into the side of Hamilton, and Hamilton visibly furious, slamming his steering wheel. And
he wasn't a happy man that year, Lewis. He had lots of reliability issues, so these kind of comings together when he was in a good position really just aggravated his entire demeanour.
Effectively cost him the championship at McLaren, it did. But yeah, I mean, one of your all-time favourites, Schumacher, starting 12th, was it? And where did he end up ultimately?
Yes, he got his really just desserts. He'd had a really fraught time leading up to this race. He was genuinely probably the 3rd or 4th best driver out there to that point that season, but for one reason or another, he just had woes set on him. He had that false pole at Monaco, but that was denied because of that coming together with Senna at Spain. And he just had all sorts of gremlins coming like Canada.
China as well. He would have been
Mercedes.
Mercedes 1-2.
Australia, he was third. Then he had some hydraulic issue. Malaysia, he was spun when he qualified. He couldn't make it up. The frustration for all these fans was just palpable. But it ultimately paid off here. Like, could say that he was lucky, of course, but for all the real patience that he had shown throughout his entire tenure at Mercedes, all that dealing with a very the tyres, you could say, they let him down many occasions.
The Pirelli tyres, of course,
going back to his whole time, 3 seasons, he just didn't seem to have the luck that Mercedes enjoy today. So to get that 3rd place, it really was just a nice sight seeing him up there.
Yeah, and he didn't actually know he was on the podium until his engineer told him.
Yeah,
when he crossed
surprise.
the checkered flag, because obviously the Maldonado-Hamilton incident came into fruition very late in the race, and he just thought he finished maybe 4th or 5th, but then when his engineer told him, "Oh no, you're on the podium, mate," he's like, "Oh, thank you very much, guys. Well done."
It's a sight you'll never forget, and of course, in parallel to his current predicament, it's one of the nicer memories to look back on.
Nicer memories indeed, and we, all have to say, keep fighting, Michael. Hope things come better. But it was a nice sight on the podium as well. It's if you like those sort of things, it was 3 generation of Ferrari drivers on the podium.
And 3 as well, who were engineered by Andrea Stella.
Yeah, and Andrea Stella as well up there to take the glory with Fernando Alonso. But Kimi Raikkonen, of course, Ferrari driver up until 2009 at that point. Michael Schumacher, Ferrari driver until 2006.
Oh, yeah, he had his little moments at Ferrari.
Yeah, he had his little moments, winning 4 world championships.
Ultimately, though, Alonso, the one who won, didn't have anything to show for his 5-year tenure at Ferrari.
Yeah, that was the thing, Alonso spent quite a bit of time, spent more time than Raikkonen, I'm pretty sure, at Ferrari, and didn't have anything to show with it. But still, 2012 was a nail-biting season right till the end, and I think Alonso's body language after the race in Brazil summed it up, just standing there staring at metal with his helmet on,
Yeah, you'll find many a GIF parodies which will be floating around on Google of his eyes just glassed over, looking out despondently. That pretty much summed up his entire stint at Ferrari. So close yet so far.
Exactly.
This didn't happen for him.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, we're going to endeavour to, every time we do our Wednesday cast, to delve into the history books a little and bring you blasts from the past, talk a bit about previous seasons and classic Grand Prix as well.
On that note, I think if you've got any ideas, the viewers, the listeners, please feel free to add your contribution, and we'll endeavour on that to look into these specific races if it brings back these fond memories of races and years gone past.
Definitely, and on the note of 2012, we look back to obviously the British Grand Prix in a fortnight's time. We look back to the 2012 British Grand Prix. Mark Webber, that was a good victory for him there.
Oh, of course, that was in fact his last victory in Formula One, as it was.
I think you're right.
As a result of the little shenanigans at 2013 at Malaysia.
Yeah, I think you're right. That was his
his
last victory in Formula One. So special one for Webber there. But
and a year later, of course, we had the deflate gate. There was pieces of rubber going around everywhere, like there were bullets out of a rifle,
exactly.
taking everyone's head off.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I think that could be just about it for this afternoon's edition. We've covered a fair bit. And
very well. Nice to have you listening to us again, and we hope to be back same time next week.
Yes, we'll be gearing up for Britain then, and hopefully there's a few more things to discuss, not least this final day of the test session, which takes place this evening Europe time. We'll see what happens from that, and what further eruptions take place between Renault and Red Bull, and whether Kimi and this Ferrari deal is any closer to being sorted.
Definitely, and be sure to check out the links in the description, obviously, to the article about Red Bull and Ferrari, and of course the Peak F1 news page as well, if you really want to get into that. So please do check them out. And from me, Jawad, and Baden, thank you for joining us, and hope you have a good day. Bye.
Bye.